trying all these different sides of journalism. So far, podcasting is my favorite because it gives me as a producer and as a podcast consumer all the time that I need to either tell a good story or listen to a good story.
Do you think having a journalist degree while producing podcasts, does it help?
It doesn't matter if I can say, because I've been working as a journalist for over 10 years now, and I've worked with exceptional journalists who studied medicine or engineering, because it's more of a skill, not just a degree. So I think journalism or media or podcasting is one of the few fields maybe that doesn't really care about degrees as much as show me what you can do.
Where does podcast fit when it comes to, let's say, a big media or content organization that has got all potential channels to produce all potential formats of content?
You don't have any limitations. An episode can be 20 minutes long or 45 minutes long. It depends on the story. So I would say the time flexibility, even here in the region, on a global scale, everyone is still learning how we can do it, what works.
My audience is B2B. My heritage is B2B corporate. And I really want to create impact in that area. What are your thoughts about B2B podcasts?
So I think we're still experimenting what best would work for B2B podcasts. But as we have B2B videos, B2B websites, and all this B2B content creation umbrella, I can see podcasting fitting into that format as well.
Hello YouTube and hello LinkedIn. This is the episode from On Speaking Terms podcast with Lara Varlamova, and we're having Doaa Farid from the National today with us, and we're talking podcasting and big media houses. Hi Dora, it's very, very nice having you in Podster Studio and On Speaking Terms, and I will allow you to introduce yourself.
Hi Laura, thank you so much for having me. You pretty much said everything. I'm Doaa, I'm from the National News. I'm a journalist. This is how I always like to describe myself and introduce myself. I've done lots of different forms of journalism, from text in print and online, newspapers and news websites, to radio, broadcasting, to TV, and then digital, and lately podcasts.
Yeah, so I was amazed actually. I was like, wow, we've got a podcast dedicated person in the National, and I definitely need to reach out and ask everything about podcasts and how it is work for the big media houses. But I want to know sort of what was your journey from, traditional media or probably news production to the podcast production within the National. How long was the journey, and what did you do at the beginning, and how did you end up doing podcasts specifically?
For me, I'm not sure. Is it a long journey? Because when I started my professional life, it was in an online radio station back in Egypt. And now when I think about it, we didn't call it at that time podcasting, but when I look at it now, it is podcasting, because I was producing for an online-based platform, recorded as live content and in audio format, and this is what podcasting is, right? But then I kind of shifted to traditional news for newspapers, for daily newspapers and magazines. And then it took me 4 years doing that. And then I kind of shifted back again to audio journalism, where I was producing and presenting news and current affairs programs in Arabic language for a radio station, for a pan-Arab radio station. And then I kind of moved to TV and then digital. And then 3 years ago, I found my favorite thing, which is podcasting. And so far, trying all these different sides of journalism, so far podcasting is my favorite because it gives me as a producer and as a podcast consumer all the time that I need to either tell a good story or listen to a good story. So it's my favorite form of journalism right now.
Well, I was going to ask actually, why is it your favorite, and why? So, can I say like, okay, so since podcasting has become a favorite format of a journalist, so can we say that this is like something that is not just a buzz or a trend, it's a need, and it's something that is going to replace, let's say, traditional media? Can I say so?
I wouldn't say it will replace, but I would say that the majority of major news organizations worldwide right now are giving big attention to podcasts. I think a few months ago, New York Times even had their audio podcast app, so that you don't have to go to Apple or Spotify or any other podcast app to listen to their podcasts, while you can download their own thing. So it's a big investment. It's a big sign that podcasting is here to stay. It's not just something it's not a trend, right, that will disappear after some time. And I remember when I was studying journalism a few years ago, everyone was saying, even college professors at that time, that you are unlucky because by the time you will graduate, printed newspapers will disappear. And my first full-time job after graduating was in a print newspaper. And until today, we still have print newspapers everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we kind of, whenever we have like a new tool or a new way to deliver information or to produce storytelling formats, people kind of get this feeling that, this is gonna take over and everything else will disappear. While I see that they can all coexist because we are different and we consume news and storytelling differently. So it's just that I found my favorite thing. Somebody else might still prefer reading text stories,
That's
right?
absolutely, I agree with you. Okay, let's probably then name it. So where does podcast fit when it comes to, let's say, a big media or content organization that has got all potential channels to produce all potential formats of content? Where does podcast fit into their objectives, into their agenda? What kind of goal an organization is pursuing when they're creating a podcast, and how it is created within the organization? Let's talk about that. Yeah.
I would say the goal would be to reach a type of audience that they don't reach within their other formats, right? So news organizations now, or media houses, they produce videos, they produce text stories on their website, social media content, and then we have this type of audience who listen to podcasts every morning, and we need to reach out to those type of people, right? So it's kind of part of a plan to diversify the way they are reaching out to their audience or their target audience. I think this is it, because as I told you, it's people are different and they consume news or stories in different ways, and every organization's goal would eventually to be to reach a wider type of audience as much as they can. And if even if they are like 20 or 30% of people of their audience, there are still a big amount of people that they would want to reach and to have as a loyal audience.
That's right. So what is the difference? What makes podcasts different from other types of, let's say, let's say news, okay, with some big headlines on a daily basis that the National is producing, or any other big houses. So we're talking to you as a professional that is coming from this background, from this industry. So how is podcast different? So what is it used for? And what is it capable to do? What news are not capable to do, let's say?
I would say the time to really delve into the story and provide analysis and more details on why this story has happened, how did it unfold, where we are now and where we're going. While on TV news, for example, you have a limited broadcast time, right? Like a news segment can be maximum of like 20 minutes.
That's right.
And then you have like a next program waiting for you to air, right? So you're kind of limited with airtime, while on podcasts you don't have any limitations. It can be, an episode can be 20 minutes long or 45 minutes long. It depends on the story. So I would say the time flexibility, and also from the back end, from the producer side, it's also the time to put together a story in a really interesting way, because in news, if something happens, you have to tell it as fast as you can, and as, of course, as accurate as you can. But you have to break the news. You have to let the story out. While on podcasting, you're kind of assured that the news will be delivered to people, but this is not what you worry about right now. You worry about the analysis side and how people will be impacted by this specific story.
What are the most popular, or what are the most popular shows that the National is producing currently in a podcast format? So what are they dedicated to?
We have news, podcasts, current affairs, analysis ones, arts and culture. We have personal finance, and we've produced previously like limited series. Depend if there's like an anniversary of a war or something that has changed the lives of many people, then we've produced limited series, sports. We kind of like have different types of podcasts.
Yeah, interesting. So for example, when it comes to a news podcast, how is it integrated with the news themselves? Is it like a review of the news, or is it something that comes easier than the news? Like how do you integrate these two big sort of things together?
So we do a news roundup every morning,
right,
before 9 a.m. and statistics say that most people listen to podcasts while they are driving to work, right? So we make sure that this podcast is like delivered and published before 9 a.m. so people can listen to it on their commute. And it's a roundup of the most trending news stories in the Middle East. Of course, because we're based in the Middle East, but we do cover global stories as well, with like a Middle East angle. And how would a conflict next door impact lives in the Middle East, for example. So it's a roundup. And also with current affairs, it's more of an analysis type of thing. And sometimes we have many correspondents at the National who travel to war zones or conflict zones, or even with like the earthquakes or places of natural disaster. And they provide coverage for multimedia, for social media, for the website, and for the newspaper, and the podcast as well, because when you read the news, you kind of want to hear about it from a person who is currently there, who can describe what they can see. So that's also an opportunity to integrate audio as part of the wider news coverage.
And do you have any kind of like understanding? So do you prefer to make these long sort of episodes, or do you make them short? Do you have any specific scenario of how you deliver those episodes? Just to understand, how do you sort of think about the podcast production side of things?
It's really flexible because with the news roundup, it's a few minutes podcast, while with the analysis, sometimes it can be 10 minutes
Yeah.
and sometimes it can be up to 45 minutes, basically, depending on the story itself. What do you know? What different voices do you have? How much is enough basically to really tell a story in an interesting way that is easy and compelling for everyone to listen to. So we're kind of flexible on that side. While when I first started to work in podcasting, not with the national, in a previous organization, it was more of we kind of like limited ourselves to a 20 minutes limit. Like we have to make this episode 20 minutes long. It like this is the limitation that we kind of put for ourselves, because that was 3 years ago and podcasting here in the region was still a new thing. So we were figuring out how best we can do it. But it's changing, right?
Yeah.
Every day, every month, we have something new here. And this is what I really love most about podcasts, is that it's a learning process for everyone. Even here in the region, on a global scale, everyone is still learning how we can do it, what works. Because some people prefer listening to 1 hour long podcasts. Some people listen to 3 hours long podcasts, right? So it's a changing industry.
It's interesting that you said about 3 hours. Well, I've never actually exceeded probably 1 hour and a half myself. I mean, not the interview that I'm making, but the piece of content that I can afford listening to.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know. There's a perception that the shorter and the more sort of crisp piece of content you create, the more viewers, let's say, the more potential this piece of content has. But obviously, it depends on the speakers that you might have and the story that you're telling. Do you prefer interviews or monologues?
Again, depends on the story. The story is your like metric here.
Yeah.
Some stories can better be told through an interview, or you can do your interview first and kind of build a script around it and provide like a narrative scenario of how you can best tell this story. So it depends on the story. I've done both. I enjoyed both and I listened to both. Depends on the story.
How long does it usually take you to produce, let's say, an episode or a series of episodes for a certain topic?
So for news organizations, it's a process, right? Because you have to have a plan, you have to coordinate with other teams who is covering a story from which country, how we can best produce this. So sometimes it takes weeks to plan, sometimes it takes months to plan, and sometimes just few days, depending on, again, the story itself. And sometimes you can have a whole thing planned and then you have like a breaking news story and then you just build your plan all over again because you have a news story and you have to accommodate to what's happening, right? So it's a process. Usually we have editorial meetings every week to plan for the days and the weeks and the months, the upcoming months as well.
Do you have your favorite type of, let's say, format for the podcast? Be it a story, be it a guest interview, be it a panel probably, and maybe it's several stories together in one episode. Do you have any kind of favorite format that you think works the best for a certain niche?
That's something I really can't I can't say what works best, right? Because some episodes work for certain reasons and some different episodes also work for other reasons. Because we're not only targeting UAE based audience, basically. We're targeting people in the region and even in the UK, US, India, other countries. And people are different and they consume things differently. So there's no like a secret ingredient of what will work best. But personally, I think I like it when I see and when I listen to a podcast interview or like watch a podcast interview with a celebrity or like an official or a politician, and they kind of reveal stories that they never shared before on TV or on other traditional forms of media because of the time limitations, right? Or because of the setting and the vibes. It was a different time, and now the podcasting kind of gives even interviewees the vibes that they can really share new things about them that they didn't have the chance to reveal before. So I kind of like when things get personal on
Yeah,
podcasts.
absolutely. And especially when you've got somebody who's very famous.
Yeah.
You can get sort of very niche, very personal things that are being revealed just because the conversation goes very smoothly and the person feels very comfortable about actually talking about it in a more intimate way, let's say. How do you usually create, let's say, a case for launching a new show? And how do you discontinue the old ones? How is that decision made? Based on what? Based on the trend, topics, speakers, performance perhaps?
That's a good question, because I still think the whole podcast industry is still in the trial and error phase. So that's something that happens, I think, across
Everywhere.
all media houses, right? You have to like review and see, what did you do? Does it work? Does it not? How differently you can produce the same thing. So I would say it's a continuing process of reviewing. It's part of the business now to stop and review and check, and if you need to change your plan to accommodate the audience needs.
So, but basically, so it's purely experimental. Is that what probably that's what I'm trying to understand from your idea? So basically, what makes me think that podcasting is a format that allows you to experiment, because probably the production process and the launching process is not as huge as if you're producing, let's say, a huge TV show that requires you a lot of actors and a huge budget. Podcast probably allows you to be experimental, try this format, try this conversation and this guest, and then probably after a few episodes switch to something a bit different. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, I think this has always been the case with traditional media as well. They used to do surveys and to have like a group study of people and let them watch a new TV show, and then kind of like listen to their comments and maybe change how they do this program, right? So I think it depends on, now it's a different world, because we tend to like, producers or production houses, they tend to measure through numbers, while we kind of forget that, numbers, it cannot be everything, because we have algorithms. So if someone watched this show, it doesn't necessarily say that this person really likes sports, for example. It was just an ad that he watched for like few seconds, but algorithm would think, oh, this person likes sports. But in fact, this person may not be really that into sports. So I would say, and instead of just looking at the numbers, we have to really go back to people and ask them, what do you want? What do you prefer? How do you listen, and when and where, and what types of shows you prefer, and always keep that in mind alongside the numbers. I don't say let's ignore the numbers. No, let's keep them, but we have to go back to people again and ask them directly, what do you like to listen to?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think that's very important what you just said, that you cannot just rely on on the numbers that, let's say, podcasting platforms provide you, because that could be just one side of an action that was performed by a listener, but it might not necessarily reflect his real interest. And why is he at this particular, let's say, piece of content at the moment? Yeah, that's a very interesting point to even reflect and think about. I wanted to ask you, just to get back to the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that podcasting is still in a stage of trial and error. And I think it will continue to be like that, because we need to have a format. I mean, we all needed to have a format that will allow us to start producing content, but at the same time, allow us to go back and reflect and change something. And I think podcasting allows us, as we agreed. But when it comes to media houses, when it comes to organizations, might not be media organizations, do you think having a journalist degree while producing podcasts, does it help or does it harm, in your opinion?
It doesn't matter, if I can say, because I've been working as a journalist for over 10 years now, and I've worked with exceptional journalists who studied medicine or engineering, because it's more of a skill, not just a degree. My degree helped me getting into this field of work, basically, because I had like-minded colleagues, right? And we all wanted to do the same thing. So we kind of, the community helped me to take the action and be there and apply for internships and jobs and all of that. But other people with different degrees, we reached the same point, but they just had a different start. Maybe it took them more time to get there, but they got there, and they still produce amazing and exceptional content. So I think journalism or media or podcasting is one of the few fields maybe that doesn't really care about degrees as much as show me what you can do. And that's the only metric here.
That's true. And does it come with experience, though, or the amount of shows you produce, for example? So, if you compare yourself at the start of the producing podcasts and to the extent of what you're doing now, how are you different? So, did it come with experience?
Yeah, of course, it's different because I came from news and deadlines, right? And now, when I remember my first ever podcast that I produced 3 years ago, it took me just maybe a few hours to come up with an idea, and I produced on the same day. And then my editor or my boss told me, yeah, why the hurry? Take more days to think about stories. And I was like, can I just take days to think? That's a lot of time, because on TV and radio,
you do not have
I could produce whole seasons in few days, right? So yeah, right now I'm completely different as a producer, and it's not that I take days to think, but I know that this episode will take few hours to put together, and this one will take weeks to prepare and coordinate with other teams and put together. So I know the time, the different ways to tell a story. This story would work better as an interview, as a Q&A thing, while this other story will better be told through a narrative script and a narrative storytelling technique.
Yeah, you're right. So it's the same as what we are producing here. The more interviews you're doing and the more post-production, let's say, products you're producing out of one interview, the next conversation that you're building with another guest, you're actually building it thinking about the post-production already. And that comes only after you've been through it many, many times, because there's no way you can get the same kind of understanding at your first interview, let's say.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, but thanks for sharing that one. So when it comes to, let's say, do you prefer audio or video interviews, or let's say podcasts?
Personally, I watch video podcasts and I listen to audio only podcasts. It depends on how much time you have, right? I drive for long hours, so I consume more audio only podcasts, but it doesn't mean that I don't watch video ones.
Do you think the video podcasting has got a potential, or is it a very niche kind of product?
I think it has a potential because I still consume content, video content on YouTube that is so long in duration, just because I'm interested in that story. And I look at the numbers and I see good numbers. So I think, and sometimes I don't watch, but I put on a show on YouTube while driving and I just listen to it.
Yeah.
Right?
I listen to a lot of YouTube content, apparently.
Yeah.
Like without watching, just listeing to it. And then when I have a chance, I'm just watching it.
Yeah, take a look every like few minutes just to see what they're doing. I think we're so lucky to have different ways to do things and to produce content right now. We are lucky because we have the long form, we have YouTube where people can sit for hours, or even streaming services. And we have Instagram and TikTok where you can find out about a video podcast through a really interesting promo to promote that episode or that show. And we also have the audio only podcasts, and that is also changing. Like Spotify, for example, a few months ago, or maybe last year, they started integrating video podcasts on their app. So I think it's exciting time. Basically, we're witnessing a change of an industry, and we're lucky to be part of this experience.
Yeah, it's more about like having an option to also see the people who are talking. From that perspective, do you think it matters, the environment the video was recorded in, and how important it is how the guests look like, let's say? Does it appeal to you, or do you, when you're producing things for the National, for example, do you brief the guests what to wear to have like the whole crew who are helping them to look better? Or how does it work?
I think this is how podcasting is different from TV, because on TV you have the big crew, you have the makeup crew and the hairstylist and all of that, just to make sure that the presenter, the host, and the guest, they both look good on cameras, because people would be sitting at their houses watching it, so they want to watch something nice. While on podcasting, it's different, because people can be driving, cooking, and just taking a look every now and then, or even sitting at the couch and watching. So the different ways of consuming podcasts kind of give producers the flexibility to simply have both, be as casual as they can be, because it's still an intimate experience, and you're not talking to a group of people. You're talking to one person or maximum two who are like driving together and listening to your podcast. So it's more of an intimate experience. I think that gives you the flexibility to look as you want to look. Basically, do you want to look casual? Do you want to dress up? What makes you comfortable, basically, at the end of the day as a host?
Yeah, and we need to also think about the cost of the production, right? So podcasting is something that is supposed to be lower in production costs versus, for example, a proper TV show or even an interview. So that's the whole point, I believe.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, definitely, things that you can do by yourself, that is very important.
Yeah.
Like, I'm talking as an individual creator, and it's very important to actually have an opportunity to have studios like Podster, for example. This is not an ad, but just to somewhere where you can come and already record. It's also important to understand how you can manage your own look. Do you need to brief the guest, etc.? So it's all about the level of casualty you want to go with, and the cost eventually behind that. How do you usually ensure the podcast aligns with the brand and the core agenda?
I think the majority of media houses or news organizations, they have teams and different divisions and departments working together towards the same goal. so it's the same thing with the national and with any news organization here in the region or on a global scale. All the teams kind of coordinate together and make sure that this new podcast or this new video series or this story is in line with the goal of the organization. And the slogan of the national is Middle East Explained. We're a regional media organization, and this is the main goal that we take into consideration every time that we are in the Middle East, and we help explaining the Middle East to English-speaking or non-Arabic-speaking audience. So it's an ongoing coordination process all the time across different departments.
And do you produce the content both in Arabic and in English? And you have podcasts in both languages?
No, just English. It's
just
an
English at this stage.
English-speaking organization.
Interesting. Maybe we could jump a little bit into discussing the potential challenges that you're facing, let's say, when it comes to producing a new show or another episode. What are the things that challenge you as a producer, and how do you overcome them?
Again, I can't say there is a specific challenge in podcasting, because the flexibility that it gives you makes every challenge an opportunity to teach yourself something new or grow in that department or field. But I always see opportunities, not challenges, in podcasting. Like a few days ago, I think Spotify came up with this new feature using AI to translate and clone the host's voice into another language, so that you can listen to like a popular US podcast, for example, in Spanish language. So I see opportunities, and I really like the podcast platforms and podcast producers and hosts. They always think of, okay, we have AI, how we can use that to reach more people and more audience in probably other languages, right? So I think I'm waiting for this feature to be available for all producers and all podcast producers, basically, because it's still available for only selective ones. So I think every new feature that we have opens new opportunities for the podcast community in the region and worldwide. So yeah, I don't see challenges. I see opportunities and more rooms for growth for the podcast community.
Yeah, but for example, when we do you usually need to script your podcasts when it comes to creating an episode? So
Yeah.
the big question that comes a lot from the companies, let's say, do we need to script? To what extent do we script the podcasts? Do we script questions only or replies? So if you can elaborate on that.
We do it differently. We do both, basically. For conversational podcasts, we don't script. We just use the outlines. Okay, we need to talk about this and this and this. Just the outlines, and then we let the conversation flow naturally. With other podcasts, mainly the narrative ones, we kind of, it takes more time to produce, because we do the interviews first, and then which is more like journalism, right? You do the interviews, and then you sit and pick the most interesting parts of your interview and see how you can build a story out of it, and then we script, and then we record, and then we publish. So we do both. They both work. It really depends on what's the best way to tell the story that you have.
Yeah, I think that's the most fascinating part of what type, how you can use this content, how many different products you can produce out of one conversation, for example. No, it's very, very exciting, and it's also very interesting. It fascinates me a lot how you can come up with the actual media product eventually, how you can sort of play around, different pieces of content that you've recorded somewhere, be it audio or video, and then, an interesting topic, for example. In terms of the monetizing podcasts, I'm not sure how relevant this is for the national, but so what are your thoughts around monetizing podcast shows? So is it a good channel to, let's say, push the advertising? And do you need to actually work towards monetization of a podcast, or you need to think about the story first and the idea first?
Again, I see producers can move both ways. You can produce stories that you really want to produce and you want to tell people about. And at the same time, you have, as every organization, take into consideration that you have to make your business sustainable, right? So I think it can move both ways as long as there are room to produce more shows and more podcasts. You can try different ways. You can have sponsored podcasts. You can have subscription-based ones if you have a really interesting story, or maybe high-profile guests, probably, that people on the listener's side would pay money just to listen to this different interview with a celebrity or a public figure, while in other stories, you just have to make that accessible for everyone.
About the an interesting thing. I came across this Forbes featuring post the other day, and they were featuring, I think, around 40 probably biggest global creators, and that list includes none of them are celebrities, none of them. And they're featured in Forbes because they've got millions and millions of subscribers, either on YouTube or on TikTok or on Instagram. And I was just delving into a story of each and every creator, and basically they started growing their audience from their hobby, let's say, or something that came absolutely natural for them in terms of the conversation. So I don't think they ever thought about a commercial side of things when they started recording it. And definitely being able to grow to that extent. And I saw some of the, videos that some of the most famous, vloggers are producing. Definitely there's a huge team behind them now. And there are a lot of sponsors, and I'm fascinated about the way they integrate brands and advertising and marketing into videos that they're producing. But I'm sure when they started doing it at the very, very beginning, that was something really super casual.
Yeah.
That just goes to show that, I mean, what is first, a chicken or an egg, right?
Yeah.
Is it a commercial side of things, or is it your passionate topic?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's really, as I told you, it's exciting times because many things work in different ways. And there's no single theory of, okay, if you've done this, then this will work. No, you have to keep trying and use different methods and ways of production and see what works best.
My logical question here would be, so when it comes to an organization, does organization structure and everything allow you to actually experiment to the extent that a proper show needs to be experimented?
Yeah, that's a good question. People could argue that the organization can afford to try while independent creators can't, right? And some other people could say, no, the independent creator has the freedom and flexibility to try and cancel and relaunch shows, while organizations, they have to stick to their plan. But the media industry has been there for like years and years, and we've seen many shows getting launched and many others getting canceled depending on the audience reaction. So I would say also it can happen both ways.
But I want to look into it with a positive sort of note, because I think organization will start understanding more and more how to work with podcasting within other, let's say, marketing activities they're doing, other content activities that they're doing, and they will understand how to use this and how to utilize those efforts to the maximum extent. And I think podcasting allows you to do that.
Yeah.
One of my last questions probably would be, since my audience is B2B, my heritage is B2B corporate, and I really want to create impact in that area. What are your thoughts about B2B podcasts? Is there an opportunity? Is there a potential? And what is the way for B2B organizations to integrate those products into their content strategy?
I never produced B2B podcasts before, but I've seen many of them, and I think they work because audience are not just customers. They can be other businesses as well. They can be other companies in your same field or in a different field that you interact with as a business, right? And I think there is an opportunity for that, and we're still here in the region. I think on a global scale as well, we're still experimenting what channels you can use for that, because if someone sees a B2B podcast on podcasting app, would they be interested to listen to it, or it would just be the limited channels, basically websites or blogs? I think we're still experimenting what best would work for B2B podcasts. But as we have B2B videos, B2B websites, and all this B2B content creation umbrella, I can see podcasting fitting into that format as well.
It's all about how do you place that story?
Yeah.
How do you tell that story?
Yeah.
Do you tell it from the perspective of a user, let's say, somebody who's using, let's say, technology, and not talking about technology, not necessarily talking about technology, but talking about some human stories?
Yeah.
And the branded, let's say, probably under the branded podcast. No, that's interesting. And the last question, personal, if you were to start your own podcast, and maybe you're not willing to start one, so what would it be, if ever?
That's a difficult question, because I always think as a member of an organization.
Yeah.
So my mindset is always thinking about, we need to do this, we need to do that. I never thought about starting my own podcast yet. Maybe I will at some point. I don't know, but for now, I think I enjoy producing for organizations more.
Good, and that's great. I mean, it's great to be at the place where you enjoy doing what you're doing, and there are plenty of creators who I think would like to produce their own shows, which is also fair. Yeah. Thank you very much for this amazing conversation.
I really enjoyed this conversation. I always enjoy talking about podcasts. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, hopefully it's not the last time we're talking here.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks. You. See you.